The ancient warning systems had been silent for 3,000 years. Deep beneath the crystal spires of Verdania Prime, machines older than most civilizations suddenly burst to life with screaming alarms that made the peaceful inhabitants cover their ears in terror. Ambassador Kira felt her translucent blue skin turn pale as she read the impossible data streaming across her screens. The Void Swarm had returned. Dr. Nail rushed through the corridors of the Coalition Research Center, his 6 legs carrying him faster than he had moved in decades. The elderly scientist had spent his entire career studying the ancient records, the forgotten warnings left by civilizations that had vanished long before the current galactic community had learned to speak. Everyone called him paranoid, obsessed with myths and legends that had no place in their peaceful galaxy. Today, those myths were coming true. The Emergency Council gathered in the Great Crystal Chamber where representatives from 200 worlds had debated trade agreements and cultural exchanges for centuries. Now they stared at holographic displays showing destruction on a scale none of them could comprehend. Entire star systems had gone dark in the outer rim, their lights snuffed out as if they had never existed. The readings were clear but impossible to accept. Kira stood before the assembled delegates, her voice trembling despite her attempts to remain calm. The Verdanian ambassador had negotiated peace treaties and settled disputes between dozens of species, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She activated the central display, showing the progression of darkness spreading across the galaxy like a disease. Each red dot represented a dead world, a silent civilization. Billions of lives ended in moments. The first reports had seemed like sensor errors. 3 mining colonies in the outer veil had stopped transmitting, their automated distress beacons falling silent within hours of each other. The Coalition had sent investigation teams, but they found only empty space where planets had orbited their stars. No debris, no radiation signatures, no evidence that anything had ever existed there. The investigators had returned with wild theories about artificial black holes and impossible weapons. But the truth was far worse. Dr. Nail accessed his private archives, files that most of the Coalition considered dangerous superstition. The ancient texts spoke of creatures that existed in the void between galaxies, entities that had consumed entire clusters of stars before retreating to the darkness to hibernate. The old civilizations had called them many names, but the most common translation was simply the Void Swarm, according to the records. They appeared every few million years, emerging from the space between galaxies to feed on the life and energy of inhabited worlds. The holographic display updated with new data as more systems went dark. The pattern was becoming clear to those who knew how to read it. The swarm moved in organized waves, consuming everything in their path before moving to the next target. They left nothing behind, not even the basic elements that made up planets and stars. Whatever technology they possessed, it was beyond anything the Coalition had ever encountered. General Vex of the Coranian military spoke first, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. The 4-armed warrior had led campaigns against pirates and raiders throughout the outer systems, but he had never faced an enemy like this. His analysis was simple and terrifying. The Coalition's combined military forces numbered in the millions, spread across hundreds of worlds. They had weapons that could crack moons and shields that could withstand stellar radiation. Against the Void Swarm, they might as well have been throwing stones at a hurricane. The debate that followed was desperate and chaotic. Some representatives demanded immediate evacuation of the outer worlds, while others insisted on attempting diplomatic contact with the swarm. Dr. Nail tried to explain that the ancient records contained no evidence of successful communication with the entities. They did not negotiate or bargain. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved on to the next target. Ambassador Kira called for silence, her authority as the Coalition's senior diplomat cutting through the panic. She had been studying the ancient archives alongside Dr. Nail, searching for any reference to successful resistance against the swarm. Most of the records were fragmentary, broken texts from civilizations that had been destroyed before they could complete their warnings. but there were references to something else. Mentions of allies who had come from the dark spaces between stars. The text spoke of warriors from worlds so hostile that they had evolved beyond normal biological limits. These beings had supposedly emerged from planets where the very atmosphere was poison, where the ground burned with radiation, where the weather could kill in seconds. The ancient writers called them Deathworlders, creatures that had learned to thrive in conditions that would destroy any normal life form. According to the fragmentary records, they had fought the swarm to a standstill before disappearing into the void. Dr. Nail brought up star charts from the deepest archives, maps that showed the locations of worlds that had been deemed too dangerous for normal colonization. Most were uninhabitable death traps, planets scoured by radiation or torn apart by gravitational forces. But there were a few that showed signs of impossible life, worlds where complex organisms had somehow learned to survive in conditions that should have been instantly fatal. The debate continued for hours as the representatives argued about myths and legends while real worlds continued to die. Finally, Ambassador Kira made the decision that would change everything. The Coalition would send a message to the most promising of the Death Worlds, a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star in an unremarkable system. The world showed signs of advanced civilization despite conditions that should have made complex life impossible. Its atmosphere contained deadly oxygen in concentrations that would kill most known species, and its surface was covered with corrosive liquid that the inhabitants somehow used to sustain life. The message was simple, encoded in mathematical principles that any advanced civilization would recognize. It contained star charts showing the Coalition's location, population data for the major worlds, and images of the destruction left by the Void Swarm. The final part of the transmission was a plea that had never been sent in the history of the galactic community. "Help us, we are dying. Please come." The signal was transmitted using the Coalition's most powerful deep space arrays, aimed at the distant blue world with its impossible inhabitants. As the message traveled through the void, the representatives could only wait and hope that the ancient legends were true, that somewhere in the darkness between stars, there were warriors who could fight the coming storm. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Dr. Emma Collins barely noticed as she stared at the data streaming across her monitors. The Deep Space Monitoring Station in Australia had been tracking unusual signals for the past 6 months, but nothing like the transmission that had arrived at 0347 local time. The mathematical sequences were too complex to be natural phenomena, too organized to be random noise from dying stars. Her fingers trembled as she isolated the signal and began running it through the station's most advanced decryption algorithms. The pattern was unlike anything in the databases, clearly artificial but following mathematical principles that suggested an intelligence far beyond anything humans had encountered. As the computer systems worked to decode the message, Emma found herself pacing the small monitoring room, her mind racing with possibilities that seemed too incredible to believe. The breakthrough came when she realized the signal was using prime number sequences as a base language, building complex mathematical concepts from simple universal truths. The first decoded section contained star charts, precise astronomical data that mapped a region of space so distant that Earth's telescopes could barely detect the individual stars. The second section was even more shocking, containing what appeared to be census data for hundreds of worlds, population figures that numbered in the trillions. Emma's hands shook as she reached for the secure communication line that would connect her directly to the International Space Coordination Council. The duty officer who answered sounded annoyed at being woken in the middle of the night, but his tone changed quickly when Emma explained what she had found. Within 20 minutes, every major space agency on Earth was patched into the call, their experts working frantically to verify the impossible data. The third section of the message made everything clear. The transmission contained images, holographic data, compressed into mathematical formulas that revealed scenes of destruction on a scale that defied comprehension. Entire solar systems reduced to empty space, worlds consumed by creatures that moved through the void like living ships. The images showed battles between conventional forces and entities that seemed to absorb energy weapons and grow stronger from the attacks. President Martinez of the United Earth Coalition stood before the emergency assembly, her face grim as she presented the translated message to the world's leaders. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and an entire galactic civilization was facing extinction from an enemy that consumed worlds like a plague. The mathematical projections included in the message showed the creature's expansion pattern, and the conclusion was unavoidable. After destroying the main galaxy, Earth would be next. General Harrison of the Global Defense Force was the first to speak, his voice cutting through the stunned silence that followed the presentation. The military implications were staggering. Earth faced an enemy that had destroyed civilizations millions of years old, creatures that fed on the energy of entire star systems. Conventional weapons would be useless against entities that could survive in the vacuum of space and adapt to any attack. The human race had perhaps 2 years before the creatures finished consuming the distant galaxy and turned their attention to nearby systems. The debate that followed was unlike anything in human history. Representatives from every nation argued about response strategies, while xenobiologists and physicists tried to understand the alien technology embedded in the message. The signal itself was proof that faster-than-light communication was possible, encoded with technical data that human scientists had been trying to develop for decades. The implications were clear. If they could decode the alien technology, humanity might be able to reach the distant galaxy before it was too late. Dr. Collins found herself leading a team of the world's best scientists and engineers, working around the clock to reverse engineer the quantum communication systems used in the alien message. The breakthrough came when they realized the signal was not just a message but a technical manual containing detailed instructions for building the devices that had sent it. The alien civilization had included everything humanity would need to respond to their desperate plea for help. The construction project that followed was the largest undertaking in human history. 3 massive colony ships were converted into warships, their hulls reinforced with the strongest materials human technology could produce. The Terra Nova, Defiant, and Prometheus were each designed to carry 50,000 volunteers, equipped with life support systems that could sustain human life for decades in the void between stars. The ships were armed with every weapon humanity had developed, from nuclear missiles to experimental energy weapons that existed only in theoretical form. The volunteers came from every nation and every walk of life. Scientists who wanted to study alien technology, soldiers who saw the mission as the ultimate test of human courage, and ordinary citizens who understood that the fate of their species hung in the balance. The selection process was brutal, designed to identify individuals who could survive in the hostile environment of deep space and function effectively in combat situations that no human had ever faced. Dr. Collins stood in the command center of the Terra Nova as the ship's faster-than-light drive came online for the first time. The technology was barely understood, reverse-engineered from alien specifications and built with human materials that might not be adequate for the task. The drive created a bubble of twisted space around the ship, allowing it to travel distances that would normally take millions of years in a matter of months. The journey to the distant galaxy would test every system they had built and every theory they had developed. The 3 ships launched simultaneously, their drives creating distortions in space that could be detected by observatories around the world. As they disappeared into the void, the remaining population of Earth could only wait and hope that their representatives would find a way to stop the creatures that threatened all life in the galaxy. The message had been clear about one thing. Traditional weapons and defensive strategies had failed completely. Whatever solution existed would have to come from a different approach, one that the peaceful alien civilization had been unable to discover. The journey through hyperspace was unlike anything the human crews had experienced. The ships traveled through regions of space where the normal laws of physics seemed to break down, where time moved differently and the boundaries between dimensions became fluid. The crews had to adapt to conditions that would have driven most species insane, learning to function in an environment that constantly challenged their understanding of reality. For humans who had evolved on a world where survival required constant adaptation to changing conditions, the journey was difficult but not impossible. As the ships approached their destination, the crews prepared for first contact with an alien civilization that had begged for their help. The humans had no idea what they would find when they arrived, but they knew that the fate of two galaxies hung in the balance. The creatures that consumed worlds were still out there, still spreading their destruction across the stars. Humanity was about to discover whether their unique evolutionary heritage would be enough to turn the tide of a war that had already claimed billions of lives. The quantum sensors aboard the Verdanian monitoring station began screaming alerts that had never been programmed into their systems. 3 massive objects were decelerating from impossible speeds in the outer system, their energy signatures. Unlike anything in the Coalition's databases, the ships that emerged from hyperspace were scarred by impacts that should have been instantly fatal, their hulls marked by radiation exposure that would have sterilized any known species. Ambassador Kira felt her breathing apparatus struggle to process the shock as she watched the sensor readings. The vessels were enormous, each one larger than the Coalition's greatest battleships, but they moved with a predatory grace that made her skin crawl. The deceleration patterns showed technology that bent the laws of physics, and the energy output suggested power sources that could fuel entire civilizations. Most disturbing of all, the ships were broadcasting on frequencies that indicated they were responding to the Coalition's desperate message. Dr. Nail rushed to the communication center, his elderly frame moving faster than it had in decades. The response signal was encoded in the same mathematical language the Coalition had used, but the complexity was far beyond anything they had transmitted. The alien ships were not just acknowledging the message, but providing detailed technical specifications for their own technology, star charts showing their point of origin, and biological data that made the scientists' hearts race with terror. The creatures aboard the ships were unlike anything in the Coalition's evolutionary database. They stood twice the height of most civilized species, their bodies dense with muscle and bone that suggested adaptation to gravitational forces that would crush normal life forms. Their biological systems included redundant organs, enhanced reflexes, and metabolic processes that could function in environments that would kill most known species within seconds. Most shocking of all, they seemed to thrive on the very conditions that the Coalition considered uninhabitable. The first contact meeting was arranged in the neutral space between the human fleet and the Coalition's defensive perimeter. Ambassador Kira led a delegation of the galaxy's most experienced diplomats, scientists, and military advisors, all of whom had spent their careers dealing with the peaceful interactions between civilized species. None of them were prepared for what they encountered when they boarded the human vessel. The airlock opened to reveal an environment that should have been instantly lethal. The atmospheric pressure was crushing, the oxygen concentration was toxic, and the temperature was hot enough to cause immediate tissue damage in most species. The humans who greeted them moved easily through conditions that would require environmental suits and life support systems for any Coalition member. Their leader, who introduced herself as Maya Rodriguez, spoke in a voice that carried undertones of controlled violence. Dr. Collins presented the human analysis of the Void Swarm threat, her explanations revealing a perspective that none of the Coalition scientists had considered. The humans had studied the fragments of data transmitted in the original message and identified patterns that the Coalition had missed. The swarm's reproduction cycle required specific rare elements that were only found in the cores of living planets, and their hive mind structure created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by unpredictable tactics. The Coalition delegates found themselves struggling to understand the human approach to the problem. Where the Coalition had focused on defensive strategies and evacuation procedures, the humans spoke casually about offensive operations that would be considered war. Crimes in civilized space. They discussed weapons that could sterilize entire worlds, tactics that involved using stellar phenomena as weapons, and strategies that required accepting casualty rates that would be unthinkable to any peaceful species. Maya Rodriguez requested detailed tactical information about the swarm's current positions, access to coalition manufacturing facilities, and complete star charts showing the locations of every world in the galaxy. The requests were logical from a military perspective, but the humans also asked for something that puzzled the coalition representatives. They wanted detailed information about the most dangerous and inhospitable worlds in the galaxy, places where normal life could not survive. Dr. Nail found himself explaining the locations of worlds that had been quarantined for millions of years, planets with crushing gravity, poisonous atmospheres, and surface conditions that would kill any known life form. The humans listened with obvious interest, their questions revealing an understanding of hostile environments that went far beyond anything the coalition had encountered. They spoke of radiation levels and atmospheric pressures as if they were minor inconveniences, discussing survival strategies for conditions that would be instantly fatal to most species. The meeting revealed the fundamental difference between the two civilizations. The coalition had evolved on stable worlds where peace and cooperation were necessary for survival. They had built their civilization around the concept of harmony with their environment, developing technology that worked with natural forces rather than against them. The humans had evolved on a world where survival required constant adaptation to changing and hostile conditions, where cooperation was just one of many strategies for dealing with deadly threats. The human fleet organization reflected their evolutionary heritage. Each ship functioned as an independent unit capable of operating in hostile environments for extended periods. The crews were cross-trained in multiple specialties, able to adapt quickly to changing circumstances and unforeseen challenges. Their technology was robust and simple, designed to function reliably under extreme conditions rather than provide maximum efficiency in controlled environments. The coalition delegates found themselves both fascinated and terrified by the human approach to problem solving. The humans had analyzed the swarm threat and developed multiple contingency plans, each one designed to exploit different weaknesses in the enemy's behavioral patterns. They spoke of using the galaxy's most dangerous environments as weapons, turning the very conditions that made worlds uninhabitable into advantages against an enemy that had evolved in the sterile environment of deep space. The technology exchange that followed the initial meeting revealed the true scope of the human capability. The coalition's most advanced systems were designed for efficiency and safety, maximizing performance while minimizing risk to the operators. Human technology was designed for survival, built to function reliably in conditions that would destroy most civilized equipment. Their weapons were brutal and simple, their defenses were redundant and robust, and their tactical doctrine was based on the assumption that every encounter would be a fight to the death. The final part of the meeting involved strategic planning for the coming conflict. The humans had identified 3 primary targets where the swarm had established major breeding colonies, each one located in a different type of hostile environment. The coalition's analysis suggested that all 3 locations were impossible to assault, but the humans saw them as opportunities to use their unique advantages against an enemy that had never encountered Deathworld tactics. As the meeting concluded, Ambassador Kira found herself confronting a disturbing realization. The coalition had sent their desperate message hoping to find allies who could help them survive the swarm's advance. Instead, they had contacted a species that was possibly more dangerous than the creatures that threatened their galaxy. The humans were willing to help, but their methods would forever change the nature of galactic civilization. The human fleet began moving toward the first target system, their ships disappearing into hyperspace with the same casual efficiency they had shown throughout the meeting. The coalition forces followed at a safe distance, their crews struggling to match the aggressive maneuvering patterns that the humans considered routine. The war against the Void Swarm was about to begin, and the galaxy was about to discover what happened when apex predators from a death world decided to go hunting. The Helix Nebula stretched across space like a dying eye, its swirling gases hiding the gas giant where the Void Swarm had established their first major breeding facility. The Coalition fleet held position at the edge of the nebula, their sensors barely able to penetrate the electromagnetic interference that made the region nearly impossible to navigate. The human fleet had disappeared into the chaotic environment 3 hours ago, and the Coalition commanders were beginning to fear they had lost their only hope of stopping the swarm. Admiral Tiarn of the Coalition Defense Force watched his tactical displays with growing confusion. The human ships had entered the nebula at maximum acceleration, diving directly into gravitational fields that should have torn their vessels apart. The gas giant they were approaching had a mass 40 times greater than most inhabited worlds, with crushing gravity that would flatten any normal spacecraft. The swarm had chosen the location specifically because it was impossible for conventional forces to assault. The first sign of combat came as energy readings that made no sense to the Coalition observers. The human ships were using the gas giant's own gravity well as a weapon, accelerating their projectiles to incredible velocities by slingshotting around the planet's massive moons. The swarm bioships, designed for the vacuum of space, began experiencing structural failures as they were pulled into the crushing gravitational environment that the humans navigated with apparent ease. Maya Rodriguez coordinated the assault from the bridge of the Terra Nova, her ship diving through the planet's upper atmosphere at speeds that would have been suicidal for any other species. The human vessels were designed to withstand atmospheric entry at hostile worlds, their hulls reinforced to survive conditions that would destroy most civilized technology. The swarm creatures, evolved for the sterile environment of deep space, had no experience with the chaotic forces that humans called weather. The breakthrough came when the human forces triggered a cascade failure in the gas giant's magnetic field, creating electromagnetic storms that disrupted the swarm's bioelectrical systems. The creatures that had adapted to absorb energy weapons found themselves overwhelmed by the random, chaotic forces that humans had learned to predict and exploit. The bioships began falling into the planet's atmosphere, their organic hulls unable to cope with the extreme pressures and temperatures. The Coalition forces watched in amazement as the human ships emerged from the nebula, their hulls glowing with residual heat but otherwise undamaged. The entire swarm facility had been destroyed in less than 6 hours, a breeding colony that had been expected to produce millions of creatures over the next decade. The humans had accomplished what the Coalition's best military minds had declared impossible, using the hostile environment itself as their primary weapon. The second target was located in the scorched sectors, where a young star's violent radiation had sterilized everything within 50 light years. The swarm had established a processing center on a world that orbited close to the stellar furnace, protected by the creature's ability to absorb energy directly from the star's output. The Coalition had written off the entire system as inaccessible, but the humans saw it as another opportunity to exploit their unique advantages. The Prometheus led the assault on the radiation-soaked world, her crew protected by shielding systems that had been designed to operate in Earth's Van Allen radiation belts. The human ships moved through the stellar radiation like submarines navigating underwater. Their crews adapted to function in environments that would cook most organic life within minutes. The swarm creatures, despite their ability to absorb energy, had never encountered radiation levels that fluctuated wildly across the electromagnetic spectrum. The battle in the scorched sectors revealed another crucial advantage of the human approach. The swarm's hive mind was optimized for processing information in predictable patterns, allowing them to coordinate attacks across vast distances with perfect precision. The chaotic radiation environment disrupted their communications, forcing individual creatures to act independently for the first time in their evolutionary history. The humans, who had evolved in an environment where individual initiative was essential for survival, easily adapted to the changing tactical situation. The final phase of the assault involved landing parties on the surface of the irradiated world, something that should have been impossible for any organic life form. The human troops moved across the burning landscape in environmental suits that would have been considered primitive by Coalition standards. but which functioned reliably in conditions that would have destroyed more sophisticated equipment. The swarm bioforms, specialized for the cold vacuum of space, found themselves unable to function effectively in the extreme heat and radiation. The third major engagement took place in the void reaches, where the swarm had established a command center in the space between galaxies. The creatures had positioned themselves in a region where normal space gave way to the quantum foam that existed at the edge of reality, protected by conditions that made conventional navigation impossible. The human fleet approached the target using techniques that the Coalition had never seen, their ships moving through distorted space-time like predators stalking prey. The Defiant led the assault on the command center, her crew using navigation techniques that had been developed for exploring the chaotic regions around black holes. The human ships moved through areas where the laws of physics became fluid. Their crews adapted to function in environments where cause and effect operated according to different rules. The swarm creatures, despite their advanced technology, had never encountered forces that operated outside the normal parameters of space-time. The battle in the void reaches was unlike anything that had been seen in the galaxy's history. The humans used the distorted space-time as a weapon, creating temporal loops that trapped swarm ships in causality paradoxes. The creatures that had consumed entire civilizations found themselves unable to process information that violated their understanding of linear time. The human crews, who had evolved on a world where quantum mechanics operated on a macro scale, adapted quickly to the non-linear environment. Dr. Collins monitored the engagements from the Terra Nova's command center, her analysis revealing the fundamental weakness that had allowed the swarm to dominate the galaxy for millions of years. The creatures had evolved in the stable environment of deep space, where physical laws operated according to predictable patterns. They had never encountered the chaotic forces that shaped evolution on Deathworlds, where survival required constant adaptation to changing and hostile conditions. The human victories in all three major engagements sent shock waves through the swarm's collective consciousness. For the first time in their evolutionary history, they had encountered a species that thrived in the very conditions that they found most disruptive. The creatures that had consumed thousands of civilizations were forced to confront the reality that their perfect adaptation to the void had become a weakness. When faced with enemies from the chaos of planetary surfaces, the Coalition forces followed the human fleet from battle to battle, their crews struggling to understand the tactical principles that made the victories possible. The humans fought like forces of nature, using their environment as a weapon and adapting instantly to changing conditions. They turned every hostile factor into an advantage, every dangerous situation into an opportunity to exploit their enemies' weaknesses. As the three human fleets regrouped for the final assault on the swarm's primary hive cluster, the Coalition began to understand the true scope of what they had unleashed. The creatures they had contacted were not just warriors from a death world, they were the ultimate expression of evolutionary adaptation to hostile environments. The galaxy was about to witness what happened when apex predators from the most dangerous world in the universe decided to eliminate a threat to their survival. The stage was set for the final confrontation, a battle that would determine whether the galaxy would be consumed by the Void Swarm or liberated by the Deathworlders who had answered the Coalition's desperate call for help. The humans had proven that their unique evolutionary heritage was more than sufficient to challenge the creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years. The question that remained was whether they could destroy the swarmary hive before the creatures adapted to their new reality. The Maelstrom sector existed at the edge of impossible, where twin pulsars spun in a deadly dance that had been killing unwary travelers for millions of years. The neutron stars fired beams of radiation across space with the regularity of cosmic lighthouses, their emissions powerful enough to sterilize entire worlds. The Void Swarm had positioned their primary hive cluster in the center of this death trap, protected by forces that made approach impossible for any sane species. The Coalition fleet maintained position at the edge of the sector, their sensors barely able to function in the chaotic electromagnetic environment. Admiral Tiaran watched the tactical displays with growing despair as the readings showed the true scope of the swarm's final stronghold. The hive cluster was enormous, a biomechanical construct the size of a small moon that pulsed with the collective consciousness of trillions of creatures. The structure was positioned perfectly between the two pulsars. Using their radiation as both shield and power source, the human fleet had been silent for 6 hours, their ships disappearing into the maelstrom at maximum acceleration while the coalition forces could only wait and hope. The plan that Maya Rodriguez had outlined seemed like suicide even by human standards. The 3 ships would coordinate their assault to coincide with the pulsar's rotation, using the deadly radiation beams as cover for their approach. The timing would have to be perfect, and the slightest miscalculation would result in instant death for everyone aboard. The Terra Nova emerged from hyperspace directly in the path of the northern pulsar's beam, her hull glowing white-hot as she absorbed radiation levels that would have vaporized most known materials. The human ship rode the energy wave like a surfer on a cosmic tsunami, using the pulsar's own output to mask her approach to the hive cluster. The swarm creatures, despite their ability to absorb energy, had never encountered radiation that fluctuated in such violent and unpredictable patterns. Maya Rodriguez felt the bridge deck vibrate under her feet as the Terra Nova's hull absorbed punishment that would have destroyed any other vessel. The human ship had been designed to survive atmospheric entry on worlds with crushing gravity and toxic atmospheres, but the environment around the pulsars pushed every system to its absolute limits. The crew moved with the practiced efficiency of predators, their enhanced reflexes and redundant biological systems allowing them to function in conditions that would kill most species instantly. The Defiant and Prometheus emerged from opposite directions, their coordinated assault timed to coincide with the brief moments when the pulsar beams swept past the hive cluster. The human ships moved through the radiation field like living things, their crews adapted to function in environments where the boundary between matter and energy became fluid. The swarm's biomechanical defenses, designed to repel conventional attacks, found themselves overwhelmed by forces that operated outside normal physical parameters. The first boarding parties launched from the 3 human ships simultaneously, their assault pods designed to penetrate the hive cluster's biomechanical hull. The pods moved through the radiation field protected by shielding that had been developed for exploring the most dangerous regions of Earth's magnetosphere. The human troops inside wore environmental suits that would have been considered primitive by coalition standards, but which functioned reliably in conditions that would have destroyed more sophisticated equipment. The interior of the hive cluster was a nightmare of organic architecture, its corridors pulsing with alien life that had never been exposed to the chaotic forces that shaped evolution on planetary surfaces. The human boarding parties moved through the biomechanical passages like antibodies fighting an infection, their weapons designed to function in any environment. The swarm creatures, despite their perfect adaptation to space, found themselves unable to cope with enemies who brought the chaos of Deathworld evolution into their sterile environment. Maya Rodriguez led the primary assault team toward the hive cluster's central nervous system, her squad moving through passages that would have driven most species insane. The biomechanical walls pulsed with the collective consciousness of trillions of creatures, their hive minds struggling to process the presence of beings who operated according to different evolutionary principles. The humans advanced with the relentless efficiency of apex predators. Their tactics adapted to exploit every weakness in the swarm's behavioral patterns. The battle for the hive cluster's core revealed the fundamental difference between the 2 evolutionary approaches. The swarm had achieved perfect efficiency through collective consciousness, eliminating the chaos and waste that characterized individual thought. The humans had evolved through chaos and competition, developing the ability to adapt instantly to changing conditions and exploit unexpected opportunities. The collision between these 2 approaches created a feedback loop that began to tear the hive mind apart. The fusion charges that the human teams planted throughout the hive cluster were crude by coalition standards, but they were designed to function reliably in any environment. The explosives had been developed for use in the most extreme conditions found on Earth, from the crushing depths of ocean trenches to the radioactive zones around nuclear disasters. The swarm's biomechanical structure, despite its advanced technology, had never been exposed to the kind of destructive forces that humans considered routine. The detonation sequence began as the three human ships withdrew to minimum safe distance, their crews protected by shielding that had been designed to survive stellar flares and gamma-ray bursts. The fusion charges exploded in sequence, each one triggering cascading failures throughout the hive cluster's neural network. The collective consciousness that had coordinated the swarm's activities across the galaxy began to fragment individual creatures, suddenly finding themselves isolated and unable to function. The psychic scream that accompanied the hive cluster's death was beyond anything the Coalition had ever recorded. The collective consciousness of trillions of creatures died in an instant, their final thoughts transmitted across the galaxy through quantum entanglement fields that connected every swarm unit. The death cry disrupted the neural networks that had coordinated the swarm's activities for millions of years, leaving individual creatures scattered across the galaxy without guidance or purpose. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the remaining swarm forces. Across the galaxy, creatures that had operated with perfect coordination began attacking each other in mindless feeding frenzies. The bioships that had consumed entire civilizations turned on their own kind, their programming corrupted by the feedback from the dying hive mind. The threat that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years collapsed in a matter of hours, destroyed by the death of the collective consciousness that had given it purpose. The human fleet regrouped in the aftermath of the victory, their ships scarred but intact after the battle in the Maelstrom sector. The Coalition forces arrived to find the pulsar system littered with the remains of the swarm's primary stronghold, fragments of biomechanical debris that would provide scientists with research material for decades. The impossible had been accomplished. Through methods that no civilized species would have considered using, the final reports from across the galaxy confirmed what the Coalition had barely dared to hope. The Void Swarm was finished, their coordinated threat eliminated by the destruction of their collective consciousness. Individual creatures still existed in scattered pockets throughout the galaxy, but they were no longer capable of the organized reproduction and expansion that had made them so dangerous. The galaxy was safe, but the cost of that safety was the knowledge that the most dangerous predators in the universe were the ones who had saved them. The human fleet began the long journey back to Coalition space, but their mission was far from over. The destroyed swarm territories represented millions of worlds that had been stripped of life, their surfaces scoured clean of everything that had once made them habitable. The Coalition expected these worlds to remain barren for millions of years, but the humans saw them as opportunities rather than disasters. The first human settlements were established on worlds that the Coalition classified as completely uninhabitable. Planets with crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, and surface temperatures that would kill most known life forms became the foundation of human expansion into the galaxy. The Deathworlders who had saved the galaxy began transforming the most hostile environments into thriving colonies, using techniques that no other species could replicate. Dr. Collins established research stations on worlds where the very air was poison, studying the remnants of swarm technology while developing new methods for terraforming hostile environments. The human scientists worked without environmental suits on planets where the radiation levels would have been instantly fatal to most Coalition species, their enhanced biology allowing them to function in conditions that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. The Coalition's response to human expansion was mixed with gratitude and terror. They offered humanity full membership in the galactic community, access to advanced technology and preferential trading agreements. At the same time, they quietly established buffer zones around human space and implemented restrictions on human travel to certain sensitive worlds. The beings who had saved the galaxy were welcomed as heroes, but they were also feared as the ultimate apex predators. The final diplomatic meetings between the Coalition and humanity established the framework for coexistence between the two civilizations. The humans would be granted sovereignty over the former swarm territories, worlds that no other species wanted to inhabit anyway. In exchange, they would provide military protection for the galaxy and assistance with any future threats that might emerge from the void between stars. The agreement was mutually beneficial, but it also acknowledged the fundamental reality that had emerged from the war. Maya Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the Terra Nova as the ship prepared for its final jump back to Earth. Her eyes focused on the distant stars where human colonies were already taking root. The galaxy was safe, but it was also forever changed by the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness between worlds, the descendants of Deathworld evolution were watching and waiting. The peaceful civilizations that had built the Coalition could sleep safely in their beds, protected by predators who had learned to make friends with extinction itself. The transmission sent back to Earth carried news of humanity's victory and their new role as the galaxy's guardians. The message also included technical specifications for technologies that would advance human civilization by thousands of years. Gifts from grateful alien species who understood that their survival had come at the cost of unleashing something far more dangerous than the creatures they had originally feared. The small blue planet that had once seemed insignificant now stood at the center of galactic politics, its inhabitants recognized as the ultimate expression of evolutionary adaptation to hostile environments. The story concluded with human ships patrolling the edges of known space, their crews watching for threats that might emerge from the cosmic void. The galaxy had learned that the most effective defense against the darkness was not walls or weapons, but predators who had evolved in conditions so hostile that they could thrive anywhere the universe might send them. The Deathworlders had answered the call for help, and in doing so, they had claimed their place as the galaxy's eternal guardians against the forces that sought to consume all life among the stars.